But the very last pharaoh who engenders the fall of the Old Kingdom is a guy called Pepi II, P-E-P-I. And he is important because he's the longest reigning monarch, really, ever. I mean, if we believe
the records that they give.
What was said about him. But basically, he is made pharaoh at the age of 6, and he lives to be 100.
Wow.
So he has a reign of 94 years, if we are to believe what's come down to us. Some people think that there's a mistake in the figures, and they actually meant 64 rather than 94. That somewhere along the line there's a kind of translation error. But nevertheless, it doesn't really affect the point, which is that he's very, very old by the end of his life. So there is a thing called the Heb-Sed, which is basically a kind of jubilee celebration of when a pharaoh, a bit like we have sort of silver and gold and platinum and all the rest of it for our monarchs. The ancient Egyptians have 30 years as the kind of unit. After 30 years, there's a big celebration. But there's a kind of dark twist to this, which is in earlier times, before, in the sort of pre-dynastic times, it was supposed, and there's not really strong evidence for this, so people debate whether it really was the case or not, but at that point, at 30 years, because the health of the king is directly attached to the health of the kingdom and the ability of the Nile to flood as it does, they kill the king after 30 years as a way of kind of saying, right, okay, we're not going to let you get old, because if you get old and frail, then the state will become old and frail and all the rest of it, and the Nile will dry up and all this awful stuff will happen. So basically, when he's at his prime, he is killed. Now, there's debates as to whether there's a sort of symbolic death here or whether a literal death. But anyway, by the time of the Old Kingdom, it's purely a symbolic ritual. So he goes through this thing where he's seen to die and be reborn. And the way that they do this is they actually put on like a kind of Olympics. It's sort of weird. To test his fitness, because obviously they're obsessed with his health.
Yeah.
To test his fitness, they make him basically run between various points. He has to do sort of track and field.
It's the ancient beam test.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it is. It really is. I mean, I think there are 2 points between which he has to run back and forth. So literally, in that sense, it is like a beep test. But anyways, 30 years is the point at which you have this first jubilee. But then every 3 years after that, you have another one. So paranoid are they about this that they're not going to let another 30 years go by before they test his fitness. Every 3 years he has to prove himself. So you ended up with this completely absurd, but they didn't really have a mechanism because they weren't killing the kings anymore. They didn't really have a mechanism for deposing a king who was seen to actually be getting old and frail. So you had this kind of bizarre thing whereby Pepi, as he's getting older and more frail, they sort of put more and more makeup on him, and they give him kind of guards to sort of carry him, and he still completes this funny ritual, this running back and forth. But by the end of it, he's basically being carried.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously getting older and older. And funnily enough, right at the end of his reign, the Nile does actually begin to dry up, and there is a famine. So it kind of confirms their worst fears that by letting this happen, by letting there be an ancient monarch, that the health of the kingdom is destroyed. But the reason it's come about is simply because he's living so long. Both his sons and his grandsons die before he does.
Which is crazy.
Because this is obviously a time, pre-modern medicine. I think the lifespan is sort of 50s.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have outliers, but there's definitely like more things that can kill you along the way.
Yeah, exactly. So they have this strange situation where there's no heir. So there's a sort of succession crisis, and various kind of cousins sort of come out of the woodwork, and they all fight each other, and it descends into kind of internecine warfare. And there is this real dark nadir for the Egyptian people, because not only are they suffering from this famine, but they now have warring factions, warlords basically, fighting it out. So this is the kind of sad end to the Old Kingdom. Of course, it regenerates again and things go back to how they were, but that's another chapter for another day.
But it's also
the Old Kingdom itself comes to a sort of fiery death in this combined famine and war-torn landscape.
Yeah.